So it's indeed a great pleasure for me to be on the BIM Talk September edition. I really appreciate the opportunity given to me to be able to share on a topic that is of great passion to me, and of course, a topic that is highly relevant to Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in particular. So, of course, as you can see from the screen at the moment, the topic is housing in Africa and the role of BIM and Offsite construction. My name, of course, is Shaba Kolo. I'm a lecturer with Solent University in Southampton. I'm a lecturer in construction management. My first degree is in quantity surveying, of course, from Federal University of Technology, MENA. And then I have a master's in construction project management, and my PhD is also in construction project management. I've been lecturing for a couple of years now, and my research is mainly centered around offsite manufacturing, artificial augmented reality, virtual reality, lean construction, and of course, housing. So in a nutshell, basically, my research is mainly streamlined into process improvement, especially with regards to improving the delivery of housing, which of course is one of the major needs of man. These are just a couple of my publications that are popping up on the screen now, and most of them centered around, or these are quite a bit old publications. These are the first publications I did, and most of them centered around offsite manufacturing, and of course with regards to Nigeria, really. That's what most of my research in the past focused on, and of course not just offsite manufacturing, but how to improve housing in Africa, especially using offsite manufacturing, considering that offsite manufacturing has been used in other developed countries as a means of improving housing delivery. So mainly, my research is focused on trying to adopt some of these innovative technologies, and of course, BIM is one of them, as a way of improving housing delivery in Nigeria, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in Africa at large. So a brief outline of what I'll be doing today is, of course, I'll have a brief introduction to the topic. I'll try to contextualize my presentation to focus more on Sub-Saharan Africa, and of course I'll let us know why I'm contextualizing it to Sub-Saharan Africa. I'll try to discuss some of the problems of housing in Sub-Saharan Africa, a brief overview of offsite manufacturing, and of course BIM, and then I'll try to show us a link between offsite manufacturing, BIM, and of course housing, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa. And then I've tried to come up with a roadmap of how BIM and offsite manufacturing can be adopted in order to enhance and improve housing delivery in Sub-Saharan Africa, and of course a conclusion to my presentation. As I go along the presentation, please, if you have any questions, I've got someone has already put the question out to me already, and I said to the person, for the benefit of others, I'll try to answer the question during my presentation. So if you've got any other questions as I go along the presentation, please try to note it down, and I'll ensure that I can answer the questions as towards the end of the presentation, just so that there is a proper flow in the presentation as I go along. Brief introduction, of course. What we can see on the screen now is a map of Africa, is what we have on the screen. And on that map, there are mainly two colors. Of course, you can see the green part of the map, and of course, we can see the blue part of the map. The green portion of the map, as you can see from the key on the map there, is mainly sub-Saharan Africa. And of course, sub-Saharan Africa are basically those countries, or comprised of those countries that are fully or partially on the southern part of the Sahara Desert, basically. So most of Africa really falls under sub-Saharan Africa. However, the parts on the blue are mainly North African countries. So countries like Egypt are mainly in the North African part of Africa. And of course, they are considered as part of the Arab world. And as a result, I have tried to contextualize my presentation or housing in Africa to focus more on sub-Saharan Africa, with exemption, of course, to North African countries, which are considered as part of the Arab world. So what I have here, of course, as we can see from the title, is the Maslow hierarchy of need. For a lot of us, I'm sure we're familiar. We know the Maslow hierarchy of need. And basically, it just starts with the bottom there of the triangle, which is colored in purple, where you have the psychological needs of man, of course, of a person. And of course, basically, that has to do with food, water, to get rest, all those psychological needs that a human being basically would want. And then moving on from there, when a man or when a person is able to achieve or attain or get some of this or all of this psychological needs, then the person moves further up the triangle to the green portion, where the person begins to think about safety. So really, if you don't have those psychological needs, then you can't really begin to think about safety. So when all of those psychological needs are met, then you push it further to the point of safety, where you now begin to think about housing, you begin to think about security of your life, security of your property. And that's the area where housing falls. So in order for a person to attain self-actualization, where they can achieve their full potentials as human beings, where they can become the best they can be, where they can achieve what they desire or want to achieve in life, it's important for all of these needs to be met. So it's important for you to first start with the psychological needs, then you go on to attaining the safety needs, then you go on to belongings and love, esteem needs, and then self-actualization. Basically, what Maslow hierarchy of needs is talking about is, in brief summary, is the fact that in order for self-actualization to be attained or to be attained, you need to be able to go through these various other steps. So you need to be able to attain all of this little or all of these other needs in order for self-actualization to be met. And one of those needs, of course, is housing. However, in the world we are today now, housing is, even though there is so much importance placed on housing in order for man or in order for human beings to attain self-actualization, a lot of people are not able to meet that minimum need or requirement of being able to either own their own property or being able to rent. People find it quite difficult to be able to move into property in a lot of countries all over the world, be it in sub-Saharan Africa, be it in the whole of Africa, in Europe, in America. There are loads of people who are, of course, homeless, who stay on the streets, and some of them might be due to reasons other than housing. However, there are several of them who are on the streets because they cannot be able to get any shelter over their heads. So there is high importance on housing in order for man or for human beings to be able to attain self-actualization. And for us to be able to, as a nation, or as a continent, for us to be able to harness self-actualization, for us to be able to get those top benefits that we can get from people or from the human resources that we have, especially in a continent like Africa, then we need to be able to ensure that their basic needs are met in order for us to be able to attain full potential, to be able to, of course, move sub-Saharan Africa to the next level in terms of development. Basically, brief statistics that I was able to put together. Of course, it is expected that by 2050, the urban population in sub-Saharan Africa will increase to about 1.2 billion. So this is not going to be the population of sub-Saharan Africa, but it's just the urban population. Urban, of course, urbanization is one of the major issues of housing, of course. A lot of people are moving from rural areas into urban areas, and as a result, there is a serious demand for housing in urban areas. So if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, look at most of the big cities. So if we look at it from the angle of Nigeria, you look at it from big cities like Lagos, you think about cities like Abuja, where there is a lot of business opportunities, where there is high potential for people to be able to attain that self-actualization, which is the top of the Maslow hierarchy of need. Then in such areas, there is a lot, the population is normally very high. If you look at it from the context of South Africa, for instance, if you look at places like Johannesburg, there's the population in Johannesburg is also high compared to some of the other areas. Places like Durban also have high population, but of course in Joburg, it's normally quite high. If you look at it also from places like Kenya, in Nairobi, the population is also very high. So generally, the urban population in Africa is expected to skyrocket at a phenomenal rate. And if the United Nations is making all of these projections, then it's important that the housing sector and of course the construction professionals are able to begin to think about ways in which we can begin to bridge this gap between housing demand, which is the demand for housing, and what we are actually delivering in order for people to be able to have a decent roof over their heads. Generally, housing shortfall is categorized or is estimated or calculated basically in three ways. First of all, it's looked at from the angle of quantities, from numbers. It's either numerical shortfall. So take, for instance, in a country like Nigeria, current statistics says the housing deficit stands at about 17 million housing units. That's the housing deficit from statistics based on Nigeria. So that's basically in terms of numbers. However, another issue we have in sub-Saharan Africa is the fact that our buildings or houses especially, sometimes even for the ones that have been constructed already, they do not reach the minimum requirements in terms of quality. So there is also the issue of qualitative shortage. So the houses, some of these buildings are there, some of these houses are there. However, their quality is not to the required standard. So we also have that issue of qualitative shortage of housing. And another one, which is quite common, especially in areas or in cities where the population is very high, is space shortfall, which of course is caused as a result of overcrowding, where you have probably, because you have places where you have, for instance, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people sharing a small, probably 4 meters by 6 meters bedroom space, really. That's going to be causing a lot of overcrowding. Excuse me. And generally, this shortfalls happen across several countries in the world, but in sub-Saharan Africa, basically, all of them tend to occur. So in sub-Saharan Africa, we have the issue of numerical shortfall. We also have the issue of qualitative shortfall. And of course, we have the issue of space shortfall. In a lot of developed countries, take for instance, in America, in the UK, they do not have issues of qualitative shortfall, neither do they have space shortfall, but then of course they have numerical. But so they are dealing with just the numbers, but in sub-Saharan Africa, we are not only dealing with the fact that the numbers or the amount of houses we have are too few, but we're also dealing with the fact that even the available housing stock are not to the required quality. And of course, there's a lot of overcrowding in a lot of buildings or houses also. So these are basically the three ways in which housing qualities, or in which housing is looked at. So what I've got here is just a brief statistics of housing backlog or shortage in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at it, averagely, you might say that a lot of them fall within the 2 million housing unit range. So on the y-axis, there, I've got the numbers, so the housing shortfall, and of course on the x-axis, I've got the various countries. So most of them tend to fall just under 2 million housing unit or slightly over. However, we've got Nigeria there standing tall with about 17 million housing deficit. Again, yes, Nigeria has the highest backlog in terms of housing. However, let's not also forget, in terms of population, Nigeria also has the largest population in Africa. So you will be able to probably justify why the number is so high. However, it goes on to say that a lot of work needs to be done in sub-Saharan Africa, especially in countries where the backlog is significantly high. So what are some of the problems of housing in Nigeria, in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance? One of the major issues we have, of course, is the high population growth rate. Like I said earlier in one of the slides, by 2050, it's expected that the urban population of sub-Saharan Africa will skyrocket to about 1.2 billion. With 1.2 billion people in the urban cities, there is going to be a lot of demand on the infrastructure in those cities. There will be a lot of demand on healthcare facilities, and of course, there will be a lot of demand on the available housing stock. So high population growth and urbanization is one of the major problems faced by several countries of the world, especially countries in sub-Saharan Africa, where the birth rate tends to be a bit on the high side also. We also have the issue of skills shortage. Skills shortage here doesn't go to say that we do not have the laborers in sub-Saharan Africa, but then it goes to mainly what skills shortage here talks about is the fact that within the sub-Saharan African continent, we do not have a high level of skills required for a lot of this jobs or a lot of these houses to be produced. So high level here basically talks about, for instance, in most African countries, a lot of the laborers, a lot of the tradesmen, as you'll call them here, a lot of the tradesmen are not educated. And because they are not educated, they need a lot of supervision in order for them to be able to deliver on the task that has been given to them, be it do a tiling on the floor, for instance, or is it talking about painting or laying blocks, for instance. Because they're not highly educated, because they are not formally trained in what they're doing, they tend to need a lot of supervision in order for a high level of work to be obtained from them. So skills shortage is one of the issues that sub-Saharan Africa is facing when it comes to housing. And another major one, of course, is unwillingness to accept new practices. New practices here are all the innovative digital construction that is available at the moment for us. Talk about offsite manufacturing, which is what this presentation is all about. Talk about BIM. For instance, in the UK, there's been a government mandate as of 2016. It was necessary, or it was mandatory for all government projects to have BIM on them. However, and of course, they have gone from the level of BIM level 0, and they're now up at the level of BIM level 2, and are gradually already moving into BIM level 3. However, in sub-Saharan Africa, how many countries are highly into BIM, where BIM is being supported by the government of the day? So those are some of the issues that we face. Again, unwillingness to accept new practices. Sometimes it doesn't only come from the fact that the government is not supporting these new practices, but sometimes it's also the professionals within the industry. So talk about the quantity surveyors, the architects, you talk about the civil engineers, the electrical engineers. Sometimes the industry is just very averse to change. We don't want to change. And that cuts across construction all over the world, really, based on research findings. The industry is averse to change. So if you look at it from the aspect of BIM, for instance, take for instance, manufacturing industry. Generally, before a car is rolled out for production and everyone begins to go to buy the car, they would have done a model for the car. They would have done proper simulation. They would have done a lot of fault detections, clash detections, in order for them to know that once we begin to roll out this car, there won't be issues. Yes, sometimes issues do come up. However, they try to do all of these things in order to ensure that at the time of final production of these cars, all of these issues have been sorted out. However, in construction, we tend not to do a lot of that, even though it's happened in manufacturing a long time ago. So again, generally, we tend to be very averse when it comes to change. We want to stick with what we know. Take, for instance, an architect who is probably in his 50s or 60s, who has been using, who basically not has been using, but who probably went to university or went to school and was taught to draw using hand, for instance, hand drawings. And gradually it's graduated and they've advanced. All right, we begin to use 2D drawings. And all of a sudden now they're telling these architects, no, we're moving into 3D, we're moving into BIM. A lot of times we don't want to follow the change. We don't want to improve. And that's really affecting sub-Saharan Africa when it comes to being able to harness some of those modern or innovative technologies that are out there that might be able to help us solve some of the issues we have, like housing. Of course, when we're able to properly contextualize some of these innovative technologies. Another one, of course, is lack of infrastructure. Infrastructure is a major issue in sub-Saharan Africa. Talk about electricity, you talk about proper road networks, you talk about all forms of infrastructure. It's highly lacking, and and that's really affecting housing delivery. Of course, we also have failure of housing policies. There are several housing policies that have been put in place in several countries in sub-Saharan Africa. However, these policies tend to have failed in being able to deliver on the promises. Again, sorry, that's a repetition there. We've got poor infrastructure. We've got cumbersome regulatory requirements. Again, the regulatory requirements in sub-Saharan Africa can be a bit tricky. Averagely, it takes about 160 days really for you to be able to, of course, that's cut across sub-Saharan Africa now, takes about 160 days averagely for you to be able to get a proper approval for you to start up a construction process. In some parts of the world, it's a lot faster, especially with key areas like housing. They tend to speed up things in order for, and some of those incentives, for instance, like speeding up approval for housing, might just be what some of those housing developers need in order to get the needed encouragement. Also, we have poor maintenance culture. Of course, we know once it's built, it's built. Maintaining it is always a big deal. It's always an issue. And if we don't maintain properly, then of course we have that issue again of not quantitative housing issue, not numerical issue now, but we have the issue of qualitative housing shortage. We also have cost of land, which is high. Another major one, of course, is housing finance. In a lot of developed countries, people don't just come out and buy a property cash. There's so many mortgage systems or mortgages in place that help you to be able to buy properties. And with such encouragement, of course, then the housing issue can begin to gradually minimize. However, I know, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, there are lots of countries with mortgage in place for the citizens to be able to acquire properties. However, the issue there is the fact that oftentimes the interest rates on some of those mortgages might be too high for people. And then the term in which they have to pay it, of course, sometimes in places like in the UK, for instance, you can get a mortgage and it lasts for as much as 35 to 40 years. Of course, some people can take it shorter, but in most sub-Saharan African countries, they do not have that opportunity to be able to take a mortgage for such a long period of time. And again, that's also affecting the level of housing delivery throughout Africa or throughout sub-Saharan Africa. So looking at the problems of housing, of course, based on research, my research, and of course, research from other scholars, offsite manufacturing and BIM can help to really minimize these issues, really. Basically, what is offsite manufacturing? It's in simple terms, it's just taking all of the traditional construction processes that are normally done on site and moving them onto a factory environment. That's basically what offsite manufacturing is all about in a nutshell. So, brief chronology of offsite manufacturing. Mainly, it started as a result of housing demand, really. That's why there was a need for offsite manufacturing or prefabricated housing, really. So for instance, I'll just go into the World War I, where after the World War, of course, there was a lot of damage done to housing, and they needed to begin to house people very fast. And they had to adopt prefabricated construction. And again, after the World War II, the same thing. There was so much damage done to housing. We need to make accommodation, give accommodation as fast as possible to our citizens. So those were the main reasons why prefabricated construction came into existence. However, between World War I and World War II, the main issue was the houses that were produced in those times were not able to stand the test of time. And as a result, people became averse towards prefabricated housing with the opinion that they do not last long, they cannot stand the test of time. And that has really affected even offsite manufacturing and prefabrication that we have today. There are several types of offsite manufacturing, but of course there are basically 4 types of them. Sub-assemblies and components, that's simple. The manufacturing of building components basically in a factory, which a lot of countries, especially in developed countries and sub-Saharan Africa, are already into. Talk about things like manufacturing the doors. A lot of companies, a lot of countries already do that. However, when you go into things like panelized, then it begins to fizzle. So basically, the flexibility tends to decrease as you go up. So from sub-assemblies and components, they're quite flexible because they're very tiny components. But by the time you get to the level of pod, then the flexibility, so flexibility in terms of being able to come up with innovative design, being able to make changes, they become more tricky. However, we've got panelized and volumetric. Panelized systems basically is just about producing 2D models or 2D parts of a building in a factory and bringing it to site and assemble. 2D parts, simply put, are basically, for instance, the walls of our buildings. If walls, for instance, can be produced in a factory, then the tendency of producing houses faster will be achievable. I wouldn't touch much on BIM. Reason is because most of the BIM talk have been on BIM, and of course we've had so much information regarding BIM. However, just a quick definition of what BIM is. It's basically a digital representation of various construction functions, processes, which face the exchange of, which help in the exchange of information between the various stakeholders involved on a project. That's basically a brief, short definition of what BIM is all about. So here I've just got, I'll try to speed up now because we're gradually running out of time. But like I said, please, if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer the questions just after I go through my slides. So what I've got here is just 3 rings trying to come up with a relationship between offsite manufacturing, housing, and of course, BIM. Of course, if there's a relationship between offsite manufacturing and housing, so where I've got the A there, so at A, where offsite manufacturing meets housing, basically what will be achieved at those points is the speed of production will be there, quality will be improved. Those are some of the things that will be achieved where offsite manufacturing meets housing. However, where offsite manufacturing meets BIM without housing, of course, then the speed of housing or improved housing delivery won't be achieved. So those are some of the technicalities. So offsite and BIM without housing, that's of course very good for the African, sub-Saharan Africa. However, it doesn't help us in improving housing delivery, which is the main focus of my presentation today. It's all about how do we improve housing delivery in sub-Saharan Africa. If you look at a relationship between housing now and BIM, there's also a great potential there to improve housing delivery. However, the shortfall here is the fact that because houses, especially if they're small houses, not multi-story buildings or blocks of flats, small houses, then the use of a BIM model for those houses might not be too economical, and as such, might not be a viable option. However, in the place where you've got offsite manufacturing, housing, and BIM, at that point where you have D right at the middle there, so some of the shortfalls of offsite manufacturing will be augmented by BIM, and at that point, housing will be able to benefit from the benefits of offsite manufacturing, and of course, the benefits of BIM all in one, basically. So quickly here, what I've got here is just the benefits and the barriers to offsite manufacturing. So I'll just run through them quickly. What are some of the benefits of offsite manufacturing? Speed, of course, it makes houses to be delivered faster, better quality of houses due to proper quality control within a factory environment. It improves sustainability in the fact that less movement of materials or less deliveries to site, and as a result, it's more sustainable. Health and safety is significantly improved, again, because most of the work is done in the factory and brought to site, so you don't have dangerous procedures being undertaken on site, and as a result, health and safety is improved. Consistent product, because the product is manufactured in the factory, it's expected that it should be the same. Take, for instance, a car manufacturing plant, for instance. The products are consistent. We don't expect a Toyota Camry or a Mercedes-Benz C-Class to be different, really. As long as it's come out from the same factory, we expect them to be exactly the same thing. So it is with offsite manufacturing. Waste reduction, again, there won't be so much waste on site. Don't forget, especially in a lot of sub-Saharan Africa where brick and block is used, most of the waste comes from brick and block. But with offsite manufacturing, there is an advantage of reduced waste. We have also logistics and operations. Logistics, of course, is all of the site arrangements are a bit easier to manage, and of course, reduce defects. Reduce defects because the parts are manufactured in the factory, it goes through proper quality control, and as a result, any form of defect will be picked up in the factory before they are delivered to site. Some of the barriers, of course, are high initial cost. Cost of setting up a factory for offsite is not small. So that's also one of the major issues. Limited design flexibility. Again, you might not be able to change designs. Again, I'll argue that because it depends on the level of OSM that's been used. If it's not a high level, then of course there is a possibility of flexibility. Shortage of local skills and knowledge, of course, in most sub-Saharan Africa, because it's not highly used, we don't have the required skill. Take, for instance, a laborer who has been, or a bricklayer who's been laying bricks for probably 20 years. How much experience do they have about offsite manufacturing? Again, a lot of training is needed for us to be able to move to that level. The nature of the industry, again, the industry is averse to change. Negative image, like I said, during the World War, most of our buildings, or most of the buildings then, were not able to stand the test of time. And as a result, there's a lot of negative image about prefabricated buildings. Client resistance, again, the client doesn't tend not to want offsite manufactured houses. That's because of the negative image. Infrastructure, we don't have the infrastructure needed. We don't have in sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, we also don't have the needed logistics and supply chains to be able to get all of those materials that we need for offsite. What are some of the benefits of BIM to offsite manufacturing now? Because we know that offsite manufacturing does has its shortfalls, but then where BIM is of major advantage is the fact that where offsite manufacturing fails, BIM is able to significantly augment it. And that is why a relationship between BIM and offsite manufacturing will go a long way in improving housing delivery in sub-Saharan Africa. The first one I've got there is design for manufacture and assembly. That's basically talking about the manufacturing of building components now. With BIM, of course, it's clear, it's easy for you to design. All stakeholders involved are able to have their own input on the design, and any issues will be sorted out even before production starts. And that's a significant advantage for offsite manufacturing and BIM. However, if it was just offsite manufacturing, for instance, company A might not know what company B is producing, and as a result, they might be producing different standards in terms of components. However, if we've got a BIM model, then all the stakeholders involved in the project, so the electrical engineers, are able to understand what the designers have designed. We've also got visualization. Of course, that's a major plus for BIM. So aside being able to manufacture offsite, you're able to visualize. So we can visualize the building, see how we're going to couple the building together, and that alone helps you to see if there will be any clash detection. So it helps you to detect clashes, if there will be any issues in terms of space, for instance, on site and all of that. It helps improve maintenance. Of course, because on a BIM model, you have all the information stored already. When it's time for maintenance, it's all you need to do is go to the BIM model, and you are able to see what type of, for instance, what's the size of pipe that runs in a particular wall. Even without opening the wall first, you can see the size of the pipe, and you know what exactly needs to be replaced. Of course, improved collaboration, that's a major advantage of BIM. Modification is minimized, again, because you can visualize, you can see what will happen in the future. It's easy for you to make any modifications before the actual construction work starts. Clients can appreciate the design more. Again, this is very good, especially for instance, when you go to see a client, you've done a beautiful design for the client. However, you've done it in BIM, and the clients can, if you decide to add virtual reality, for instance, that's one, or augmented reality, for instance, then take, for instance, you can go there with your Googles, your virtual reality Google, and the client can basically see himself inside a property or inside a building that they want to construct. They can go in, use virtually, switch on the light, see what the light looks like, see what the painting of the wall looks like, and that alone helps to draw clients really to one. Of course, it combats the poor reputation of OSM. Help in training. So if you want to train staff regarding how OSM works, BIM is of course there to help, because they can easily visualize all of this thing, and training can be done even before they go to site. And of course, we've got lastly improved logistics on site. Again, that has to do with site layout and all of that. So what I've got here is just a model of how to improve housing delivery in sub-Saharan Africa. What are some of the barriers? What are the actions that are needed? And of course, what the stakeholders, what the various stakeholders can do, or the various stakeholders involved, in order for those actions to be carried out, in order for our goal of improving housing delivery in sub-Saharan Africa to be achieved. So I know I've rushed through the end, but of course, I hope if there are any questions, you will be able to ask me once I conclude the presentation. So in conclusion, basically, housing, of course, or having a shelter over one's head is a very important necessity for everyone. And it's important that in sub-Saharan Africa, we are able to provide the needed housing in terms of quantity, in terms of quality, to the right people. Housing, of course, the shortage of housing can be in different forms. It can be in the form of quantity, can be in the form of qualitative, or is it in forms of space, which is overcrowding. There are numerous problems. There are several issues with housing aside all of this one. However, there is a lot of hope for this housing in sub-Saharan Africa, especially with the use of building information modeling and, of course, offsite manufacturing. Again, offsite manufacturing does have its barriers. However, BIM can help in minimizing or completely eliminating most of the barriers to offsite manufacturing that is faced. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for everyone who's listened to me. I do appreciate it. And I hope to be able to deliver another talk sometime in the near future. Thank you very much. I'll appreciate any comments and questions from now.
Thank you very much for this section, Doctor. We are now available for questions from everyone. Kindly raise your hand, and then we'll allow you to ask your question. Yes, so I also do have a question. Some questions, not a question.
Okay.
So now, as we begin to look at the requirements of the Offsite construction process.
Yeah.
So Now, it means that factories come to mind.
Absolutely.
Now, and if we begin to look at the infrastructure available in most of the sub-Saharan African countries, now,
Yeah.
would it be viable? Do you think that it will be viable to actually kickstart the development of factories, and then looking at the inputs that these factories will require to efficiently run in terms of electricity, in terms of location, in terms of local government regulations, and all of that? Do you think that it will actually be a viable investment? That's a part of it. And then also, if we look at the materials needed for offsite construction, there are
Yeah.
some materials that has been globally adjusted, have been sustainable. Example of that would be the LVL wood, precast concrete, and a lot of others. Do you think that these materials can be adequately are readily available to feed the factories needed for producing the offsite construction materials? And there's also been the cost of that, the cost of running. Would it be a viable business opportunity to actually say I'm running an offsite construction process in a sub-Saharan African country?
Okay. Thank you for the question. And of course, first of all, looking at it from the angle of if it's a viable investment or not. When you look at offsite manufacturing, there are various types of offsite manufacturing. And generally, in order for you to be able to harness the benefits of offsite manufacturing, you first need to think about which offsite manufacturing are we adopting. So take, for instance, if a company decides to invest into sub-assemblies and components. So simply put, constructing precast lintels, constructing precast stairs, for instance. If a company decides to invest in that, the cost of investing in that is less compared to the cost of investing in a volumetric type of offsite manufacturing where the entire building is done in a factory. So I'll say yes, it's viable, and the reason is because we are a growing country, or because we're a growing continent really, and considering the massive gap in housing demand, taking baby steps in terms of offsite manufacturing. So not adopting or not implementing a high level offsite manufacturing, but simple things that will help us to speed up housing delivery. So take, for instance, simple things like precast lintels. Of course, a lot of people do that now, but really that's offsite manufacturing. But how many people do precast concrete? Have we got factories where you can easily buy a precast lintel? Have we got standards for precast lintels, for instance, in most sub-Saharan Africa? Yes, in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa there are standards, but in some parts there are no standards. Once we begin to have this standard, so take, for instance, you want to do a concrete lintel, for instance. If there was a factory where one can go and get a lintel of 225 by 225 by probably 1.2 meters, and you need 10 of them or 4 of them, if you're building a housing estate, some of those things will significantly help to improve housing delivery. So I'll say it's viable. However, it's best to start gradually. So do not adopt a high level of offsite manufacturing yet, but something very little that helps to improve. Don't forget, what we're after here is not about is not just about improving, or it's not just about adopting offsite manufacturing, but it's about improving the process of construction within sub-Saharan Africa, which is what will help speed up things. And then you also mentioned something about the materials. Again, generally, what a lot of countries have done is they have used materials that are close to them. So for instance, I'll be specific now because, of course, I know the Nigerian construction industry to an extent, and most of our buildings are constructed using blocks, of course, and concrete, for instance. So if it's all about using prefabricated concrete, which large construction companies like Julius Berger do, they use a lot of prefabricated components, and their job tends to be very fast. If we can begin to use, because since our construction is already highly concrete based, then it's all about trying to adopt prefabricated concrete rather than in-situ concrete, which generally causes a lot of delay in terms of curing. Again, when it comes to running cost, that's that's definitely a major issue at the moment. Africa, most sub-Saharan Africans do not have the needed infrastructure to be able to successfully run offsite manufacturing. But like I said, if we are to start adopting offsite manufacturing minimally, then we will be able to begin to reap the benefits in the long run. But again, offsite manufacturing, it's not a short-term business. It's not short-term, it's long-term. In most developed countries, for instance, in the UK, most of the houses are still produced or built using traditional construction. Just a few of the houses that are supplied are produced using offsite manufacturing. So really, it's not like a lot of advanced countries have gone far. The only countries that have really gone far in offsite manufacturing are Nordic countries, countries like Sweden, Finland. They are really advanced. America too is fairly advanced, but most countries, really, even developed countries, are not highly into offsite manufacturing. Again, that's because it's important to gradually incorporate it into your business rather than starting offsite manufacturing at a blow. So I think if we begin to take baby steps towards that, then in the next 10 years, in the next 15 years, then we might be able to properly grasp offsite manufacturing and be able to harness its benefits to a large extent. So that's what I think about the question you just asked me.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, please just unmute your mic and ask your question.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, this is Shogo from Lagos.
Oh, all right. Good to have you.
Yeah, so thank you very, very much. It's been an enlightening presentation so far, and I'm glad to be part of this the webinar stuff. So I'd like to ask again, just taking you back to the presentation.
Yeah.
When you talked about the benefits of BIM, I want you to explain more on DFMA and also how it improves sustainability of materials. Because I didn't quite get that when you were talking about the benefit of BIM.
Okay. All right. Basically, DFMA basically stands for Design for Manufacturing and Assembly. And with BIM, basically, BIM is a collaborative platform, really. However, BIM helps you to design. And what BIM will help you achieve in terms of design for manufacturing and assembly is in the design of building components. So take, for instance, in the design of a lintel or in the design of a wall, for instance. With design for manufacturing and assembly and BIM, it's easier for you to design. And when the design is done, other stakeholders who might need that design. So take, for instance, if you've designed a wall, for instance, and the electrical guy needs to pass his or her pipes through this wall. With design for manufacturing and assembly, it's easy for the electrical guys based on the BIM model to be able to see what the design looks like and be able to actually visualize and actually simulate where they think their pipe should pass through in order for them to bring electricity into a building. So basically, that's what design for manufacture and assembly it's all about. It's all about the designing of building components, but now we're talking of the designing of offsite building components, because with offsite manufacturing, we're looking to move most of the construction to a factory. However, for that to happen, they need to be designed. And that's where design for manufacturing and assembly comes in. We're looking at how to design all of these components in order for them to be manufactured prior to manufacturing so that we can successfully assemble them. And that's where BIM comes in, because BIM can help us link manufacturing and assembly together in order for us to have a seamless process where we can connect the building together on site without having delays, really. So that's basically what DFMA is all about. Are you there?
All right. Then when you talked about improved sustainability of materials, as
Sustainability of?
yes, hello,
I can hear you.
of material.
Okay, improve sustainability of materials. All right. Basically, what I meant by improve sustainability of materials, like I said, I don't know if you can still see the slide, but I said that improve sustainability of materials in case of deconstruction. So of course, now we don't do, basically based on the CIOB code of practice, we don't demolish buildings, really. We deconstruct buildings. And deconstruction is basically trying to rip the building apart slightly or rip it apart. However, trying to ensure that parts of the building that can be used are kept. That's basically what deconstruction is all about. And how does BIM help us do that? With a BIM model, of course, you can tell what material was used in constructing this wall because it's there on the information. You can also tell what kind of wall this is. You can tell what kind of floor this is and all of that. And because the BIM model gives you that opportunity to be able to tell all of those things, when a building is being deconstructed, it's easy for you to be able to rip the building apart and try to gather the materials that can be reused. Take, for instance, concrete, for instance, can be reused. The materials that can't be reused, then it's easy for you to know what needs to go to landfill. So that's basically where sustainability comes in the fact that when the building is demolished or deconstructed, the entire building is not just demolished and every part of the building is sent into landfills. However, we are able to deconstruct the building in a way that the parts that can be reused for something else are able to be separated so that they can be reused. So that's basically where sustainability comes in, because don't forget, sustainability is all about being able to, rather than throw a material away, it's all about being able to recycle or to reuse a material. So the sustainability I'm looking at here is being able to reuse a construction material rather than throwing the material away because you feel that it's not useful. To a large extent, a lot of sub-Saharan Africans do a lot of reuse. Take, for instance, using broken blocks to fill places. That's a sustainable way of doing things. And that's basically sustainability of materials that I've talked about here, being able to get the materials and use them for a fresh construction project. And like I said, in the case of deconstruction. any other questions for me?
Okay, we also
okay.
We have a question from Yemi. Can just unmute your mic and okay, it seems that that's the end of the question. Thank you
All right.
all for the session, and thank you, Doctor, for accepting to present. We really do appreciate the time, and
It's
we hope that
always a pleasure.
be available for more and more sessions.
Yeah, I hope to be able to deliver more sessions on BIM Talk with the near future. Thank you very much to everyone.
If you do have more questions after the session, kindly please send us an email at info@bimafrica.org, and we'll direct them to him for his attention. Thank you all for coming, and do have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, and do have a wonderful day too.
Bye.